Welcome everybody to Empath Tools For Now, number 2. My name is Julie North, and if you want to find out some more information about me or the services that I offer, you can do that at www.julienorth.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we have a YouTube channel where most of these classes are being uploaded for free. So you can rewatch this class if you're attending it now, or you can watch it later. You can share it with your friends. They are public and available for anyone to use. So hopefully you get something out of this. This is the second one of these classes that we're doing. Last week's class was the first one, and we covered some things like filtering your field and balancing your food. So if you didn't get a chance to check that out, I would strongly encourage that if you are a sensitive person to energy of other people or environments. That is an incredibly useful tool and probably one of the most important things you can do if you're sensitive. This week, we're going to be covering some things around nutrition, high power oils, some flower essences, and some crystals or stones that will be helpful for that. So a little bit about me. I'm a medium and medical intuitive based in Ohio, and I see people for one-on-one sessions. I teach classes and workshops and do some lectures. I think it's important to always remind everyone that I'm not a doctor, that I'm not medically trained or licensed. And so sometimes we'll be talking about some health related things. And I just want to make sure that you don't take that information as medical advice or practicing medicine or diagnosing, treating, curing, prescribing, any of those things, even if they're phrased that way. So just make sure anything health related, you get checked out by your doctor. So let's talk briefly about what an empath is. If you want a much more complete version of what constitutes being empathic or sensitive to energy, there's a pretty good discussion at the beginning of the first video on the YouTube channel for Empath Tools number 1. But basically, an empath is someone who has extra wiring. So every human being has some wiring that allows you to pick up energy and emotions from other people or from environments that maybe another person wouldn't. Emotions or energy that they're carrying or that they're hiding or that they have stored in their system. And an empath has a lot more of that wiring. And that's why we do these classes, because it's not, you can't look at someone and tell if they're an empath. And a lot of the people who are empathic or sensitive don't know for a long time that they're different than anyone else. So they're trying to use the tools that the average person would use to get through the day, go through their job, deal with their relationships, go to Walmart. And those tools don't work when you're picking up excess energy. So empaths tend to work a little bit like a sponge or a vacuum cleaner. And rather than just recognizing that another person is sad, for example, they will soak up that person's sad and process it on their wiring the same way they would if it were their own emotion. And it takes a toll on you from a physical standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from an energetic standpoint. And that's really where I want to start, is the physical toll that it takes on the system. So when you have an emotional episode of your own, whether you're super excited and you're having a great day and things are awesome, or if you are, having a terrible day and you're crying your eyes out, when that ends, we're often exhausted. We've kind of burned up our energy. So nutrition in the body is your fuel, just like gas for your car. And we all use it for obviously cellular function, but also when we're processing a lot of emotion or energy, which is why we're tired. When you're an empath and you're soaking up other people's energy, it might be that the person next to you is having an intense experience, and so you're going to burn up a lot of your own energy processing their emotion right away. Or it could be that everybody around you is perfectly fine and they're having average normal daily energies, but there's a lot of them. You work in an office building, you went to the grocery store, you went to a party, things can seem pretty normal, but when you're taking up all of those people's energy and processing it on your field, you're going to burn up nutrition. So one of the things that is pretty crucial for empaths to keep in mind is that in the realm of nutrition, there's a grouping of minerals and ionic minerals called trace minerals. So trace minerals and ionic minerals. And if you're not familiar with those, I would strongly encourage you to do some homework on that. There's a great book out written by a chiropractor in Michigan called Minerals for the Genetic Code. Now, the author that's on that book is not actually the chiropractor, but the chiropractor is the person that all that information came from, to the best of my knowledge. And it outlines a lot of the trace minerals. If you Google trace minerals, you'll often get just a handful of them, like 8. And some of them are not necessarily minerals that you only need in minuscule amounts. So that's why they're called trace minerals for the most part. You need them in trace amounts. So every single trace mineral is used in the body in one form or another. But for the most part, your body only needs them in these tiny amounts. And you can get that pretty easily through food. But when you're an empath and you're burning up nutrients at an exponentially higher rate than the average person, it's difficult to keep your nutrient density up, particularly when it comes to trace minerals. So we're going to go through a couple of the individual ones just so that you have some basic idea. But overall, when you put all of the trace minerals together, they're kind of responsible for 2 primary things. 1, cellular function and cell-to-cell communication in the body. So that's pretty much every single thing about being a human being is cell-to-cell communication. And when you don't have a proper trace mineral load, not only will a certain organ system not work, but your cell-to-cell communication will start breaking down. And so it's important to keep that load up. The other piece of that is your cells often don't have the capacity to uptake other nutrients if you don't have a trace mineral load in your system. So some trace minerals that people are familiar with are like magnesium and zinc, but other ones that they're not familiar with may be rhodium, chromium, molybdenum, boron, manganese. And again, you know, for the most part, you're not going to want to go buy a bottle of manganese and take it. Your body needs a very tiny amount of that. But in all of the industrialized agricultural countries, the soil is pretty depleted in trace minerals, and that makes the food chain depleted. So it's really helpful for most empaths and sensitive people to take some kind of a regulated trace mineral compound. There are a large volume of options out there. The label for trace minerals doesn't always say everything that's in it. You're really looking for something that has more than 50 trace minerals and ionic minerals in it. And even some of the really good ones don't list all of that on the label. So when you are doing your homework, and you do want to do your homework for your trace minerals, get online and see if you can't find a fact data sheet. The one that I take is called Colloidal Life. I'll show it to you, actually. So it's called Colloidal Life Trace Minerals, and it's by Source Naturals, and it has 72 in it. This gets recommended for a lot of people, but I want to caution you around taking this. There is a preservative. So one of the great things about this trace mineral compound is that it has 72 trace minerals and ionic minerals in it, and it's a sublingual. So rather than going in your drink and then into your digestive system, it actually goes under your tongue and gets absorbed right into your bloodstream, which makes your uptake faster. You're not having to work around some kind of a digestive issue. So when you take a sublingual trace mineral, it's compound, it's gonna activate in your system faster. So you'll often notice in like 3 or 4 days a difference. Trace mineral deficiency can show up. It causes a lot of problems, but the things that people notice the most when they're nutritionally deficient in trace minerals: sleep pattern problems, the inability to, like, their brain to work fast enough. It used to work fast and now it doesn't. Not being able to find the word for a sentence. Some people will have heart arrhythmias. Your hand-eye coordination can get off. So you know, your cuts don't heal as fast. There are bigger problems at play when you're having those kind of symptoms, but those are the things that people notice, is that I'm not sleeping very well. So back to what you want to watch out for around this trace mineral. It has a preservative in it called methylparaben, and some people are very, very sensitive to that preservative. And if you start taking this particular variety and it doesn't work for you, there are other brands that work very well. I don't particularly know of another sublingual, but there are a couple of other good options out there that have like 70 trace minerals. If you go to the practitioners page on my website, At the top of that page will be a list of a couple of trace mineral options that the other side brings up a fair amount. One of them is superior fulvic and humic trace minerals. I think it's X935. It's a black bottle in a black box, and it's a 6-month supply, but it is a liquid that gets dropped into a drink. Fortunately for most people, that one's tasteless. Every once in a while, someone can notice that. And that's one of the things to keep in mind about liquid trace minerals. So how many trace minerals does it have in it? Are they regulated, or is it random? Like, are you getting random amounts of cobalt and random amounts of rhodium in that, or is it somewhat regulated? And does it taste bad? Because for a lot of us, if it tastes like battery acid, we're not going to drink it. We won't take it. And that doesn't do you any good if it's just sitting on your shelf. So a sublingual will work quick. One that goes through the digestive system it's still going to help you, but it's going to make slower change over a period of time. So it might be a couple of weeks, and it might not seem to you quite like, holy smokes, I can really tell the difference. But again, you want to be careful about what's in it. So the book I mentioned to you, food is always going to be your best source. So while we're talking about supplementation, when you're looking for nutrients, the body's always going to uptake it out of food better. Again, the problem is that our food chain is deficient. So some of these ones that I'm going to mention to you, I'll list a couple of food sources that they are usually found in. But if it's a meat, it's going to be dependent upon whether the animal that came from got good nutrition and got that compound in its food source. If it's a plant-based food, was it grown in soil that was deficient? So nutrient density will vary depending upon the plant itself. So I want to start with one of the ones that's the most important, and that's selenium. And if you're not familiar with selenium, selenium is the trace mineral that the thyroid uses to properly process iodine. So a lot of people who have Hashimoto's or who have imbalanced thyroid also have, instead of just having an iodine issue, they actually have a selenium issue or a combination thereof. So you can have all of this iodine in your system, and if you don't have an appropriate selenium load, it's not going to be picked up in your thyroid. When you look online at trace minerals, they'll often list fluoride or fluorine as one of the trace minerals. But one of the things that you'll find is that fluoride is a -1 electron, and iodine is a -1 electron, and fluoride is lighter and faster. So if your thyroid is looking for that -1 electron to pick up and you have fluoride in your system, it will pick up the fluoride before it will pick up the iodine. And my understanding is that it instantly disrupts about 26 pathways in your thyroid. So here at my house, I don't use fluoride toothpaste or mouthwash or any of those products. You want to be careful about keeping fluoride out of your water. If you live in a municipality, almost every municipality in the United States fluoridates their water. And there's a whole bunch of information you can look up around, the history of that and why that is. But a lot of people have a filter in their refrigerator door. That isn't going to take out fluoride. A lot of people buy a Brita or a Pure that goes on their counter or hooks onto their spigot. It's not going to take out fluoride. You can buy an awesome, super amazing Berkey filter and put it on your counter, and it's not going to take out fluoride unless you specifically get the filter for fluoride. So when you just buy a regular Berkey filter, it doesn't come with the filter that takes out fluoride. You have to special order that. So keep that in mind when you're looking for filtration systems for your water. If you are using an RO system, it's also going to take out a lot of your mineral load. So you're going to have a greater need for needing to supplement through through food or through a trace mineral compound. So thyroid makes antioxidants and prevents cell damage. Why is that? Well, it's important for any human being. But when you're an empath and you're running 220 volts of energy through your system instead of 110, it's a big stress. Stress is a huge factor for being an empath. And selenium is sort of the nutrient that the cells use under stress. So in addition to helping your body make antioxidants, it's going to protect your body from heavy metal damage. It will prevent cell damage. It reduces, scientifically proven to reduce DNA damage in the body. It lowers your oxidative stress, which is a big deal. So selenium is one of those supplements. And again, check with your doctor and make sure that it's fine for you. Hopefully you have a medical professional that has a good understanding of nutrition rather than just pharmacology. And they'll usually, they can run blood tests to tell you if you're low, but it's a trace mineral you can buy pretty inexpensively at the store and take in addition to your food sources or other nutrients that you're taking. It's a big deal for neurological disorders. So there's been some studies that have shown how selenium deficiency contributes to problems like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and how increasing those people's selenium intake has a really positive effect. So, you know, we're not talking about Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. We're talking about being an empath. And remember that your chain, you know, cell-to-cell communication through your body is highly amped. So you're going to burn up those trace minerals fast. So if it can affect the neurological system for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's to that extent, imagine what it can do for your system, you know, as you go through your day. You know, stress reduction, DNA healing and health, cellular health. So that's a big deal. It has shown to reduce some inflammation. I haven't used it for that. Empaths do have a tendency to struggle with inflammation issues in their body. And selenium is just one of the things that's helpful to that. Copper is another trace mineral that's usually in a trace mineral compound, but not necessarily easy to get in your food. And let me just back up for a second. I made a little list here I wanted to share with you of things that naturally contain selenium. And again, it's going to be in varying amounts. So oysters, tuna, Brazil nuts, eggs, sardines, sunflower seeds, chicken breasts, and shiitake mushrooms. So sunflower seeds and shiitake mushrooms actually have quite a number of trace minerals in them, and they're a good source of several of those. So they come up in a couple of other lists. So back to copper. Copper is not something that you're going to want to take as a standalone trace mineral. Like you could selenium. You're going to want to make sure that it's in your food sources or that it's in your supplementation if you're taking a trace mineral compound. Helps your body make red blood cells. The biggest thing with copper is that it helps you maintain nerve health, again, with the cell-to-cell communication. So when you're running electrical signals through your nervous system, it's changing the charge in that. And if you don't have an appropriate copper level or you're burning that up in your system, then your nervous system is going to suffer. And I think this is a good point to talk a little bit about how energy works in the body in association with your nervous system. So, you know, we talk a lot about the chakras and meridians and the energetic field, but your body is full of energetic wiring. And in the system, the energy lines are, in most cases, pretty close to the nervous system lines. So when you have a nerve going somewhere, you have an energetic line there. And there's these default mechanisms that are kind of pre-wired into the human being. And one of them is that if you are overloaded in energy, that the energetic system will short circuit over to the nervous system so the body can help process that energy out, right? Which is why, partially why we burn up excess energy, but also why empaths usually do quite a number on their nervous system. And empaths are prone to depression and anxiety and panic attacks. And a lot of that's from overload and from a nervous system that doesn't have the nutrients that it needs to heal itself, let alone maintain its daily balance. So, you know, we're not trying to get nutrition into us to keep us right where we are. Most of us are in need of healing and we haven't had the nutrition to do that. So supplementation or juicing, which is another option for concentrating nutrition as far as nutrition density goes, are great ways to help upload the body in safe ways so that you can get through your day, but also do repair work. So nerve health. Copper also helps you uptake iron and is important in making white blood cells, which normally wouldn't be something that I brought up, but under the current circumstances, with COVID going on, your body's immune system response is going to be more important than ever. And people who are stressed have a lowered immune system. So emotional stress creates physiological stress, again, with burning up all those nutrients. Molybdenum is something that most people aren't very familiar with, but it plays a super crucial role in the body. And if you're not getting it, and it's rare to have a deficiency, except that empaths have a tendency towards being a little bit deficient. But it prevents the buildup of sulfites in the body, and prevents the deadly toxins building up in the system. So, you have these energetic toxins, baggage, anything that's not serving the system in the moment, and physiological toxins, and they kind of go hand in hand. So if you don't have molybdenum in your system, your body's going to build up to dangerous levels of toxicity, which cause other kinds of illness. And there's been some studies around that for cardiovascular health and stuff. We don't need to get into all of that. Things that are great for molybdenum, though, if you're looking for food sources: beans, lentils, grains, and then organ meats if you happen to be a meat eater. And then the last trace mineral that I really want to talk about is boron. This is one that you can take all by itself, in addition to a trace mineral compound. Again, I would recommend that you check with your healthcare professional before you do that. Boron is great for bone health, which seems maybe like a strange thing for an empath. But our bones are the store of a lot of our mineral compounds. And when we are deficient, we'll pull from our stores. So if you're not getting enough boron in your system, as a young person, you don't build bones very well. As an older person, you don't regenerate bones very well. So boron's really helpful for that. It's helpful in the production of D3, which is crucial to your immune system, mood regulation, the way that your body works with magnesium and calcium. It's also an anti-inflammatory. So boron's really well known for improving brain function. My doctor put me on boron because of my nervous system, same basic principle. And so I took that for a while. It takes the body about 3 months to build a new nerve. And if you don't have the right nutrients to do that, it's not going to. So I just wanted to make sure that you're all very aware of the importance of eating healthy food. And the more that you cook your food, the less nutrient availability there is in it. But for a lot of empaths, they need to supplement with a trace mineral compound. And, you can take it every day for a while and feel great. And then we kind of get out of the habit of taking things, and that's fine. You don't have to take it every day for the rest of your life. But if you get to a place where you notice, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you hit a wall, you probably need to go back on your trace minerals again, because you just don't have what you need to get through the day. So the other thing I want to mention is how crucial cell salts are for that process, for both cellular function and the toxicity cleanup in the body. There are 24 salts in the body. 12 of those are considered essential, crucial cell salts. And if you think about something like Gatorade, which helps hydrate the body, it does that through having a couple of the cell salts in it that we're talking about. So of the 12 essential cell salts, Gatorade might have a few, but it doesn't have all 12, and it's got a bunch of other junk in it. So I'm not recommending that to you, but you can buy at most good health food stores or online a cell salt compound. The one that I think is the easiest to find is this one. It's called, I don't know if you can see that or not, actually, with that glare. Maybe not. Bioplasma. It's made by Highlands. And if you open this up, so there's 1,000 of them in this bottle. And I think it was like $16. So this is not an expensive thing. But if you dump them out, they're just little tiny white tablets. And the bottle will tell you to take 4 of them under your tongue. Again, a sublingual, going under your tongue and absorbing right into your bloodstream. 4 of them under your tongue 3 times a day. I don't personally see very many people that need it 3 times a day. Once or twice a day seems to be enough for most people. So, the other side's always working at everything from a place of efficiency. If you don't need it 3 times a day, don't take it 3 times a day. But if you're the big reason for cell salts is that your cell's ability to uptake water and work properly with hydration is really dependent upon those cell salt levels. And if your cells can't hydrate properly, they can't clean themselves, they don't work well, your body tightens. So no matter how much water you're drinking, you're still dehydrated. So there's probably a whole bunch of you in here that drink water all day long and you're just peeing it right out, basically, and you're still thirsty. And it's because you might be cell salt deficient. So I would recommend to anybody that's empathic that they keep their hydration levels up, and that they look at potentially taking a trace mineral compound as part of your nutrient density. Try to eat foods that are more nutrient packed and lighter on the cooking. So think things like stir fries or things that are quick cooked, not things that, it's not that you can't have a roast with potatoes in it that's simmered for 8 hours, but the nutrient density in that might be different. Another good source of trace minerals is actually sauerkraut, and there are other fermented foods that are good at that too. So, people think of fermented foods from a gut flora standpoint, and it's great for that. If your gut flora is off, your body's ability to extract nutrients from food and uptake them properly is going to be hindered. So that's a big problem. But when you eat raw, truly fermented sauerkraut, you're going to get all these probiotics. But if you cook sauerkraut, you kill off the probiotics, but the trace minerals are more bioavailable to your system. So, just something to keep in mind when you're looking at trying to keep your system well. If anybody has any trace mineral compounds that they particularly love, I would be more than happy to check them out and see what the other side says about that. If you want to throw an email, my way. So let me just stop here for a second. Any of you have any questions about nutrition? You can raise your hand in the app, and I'll take a look at that. I'll give you a minute here. And see where this is. Nope, no questions. You guys are so quiet. Okay. All right, so let's move on. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is something that's fairly new and that I have had the pleasure of being able to work with over the last probably 9-10 months. And it's called high power oils. So these are made by a guy here in Columbus, Ohio named Chris Tanner. And if you are a Facebook person, you can find the page on Facebook under high power oils. And I have a bunch of them, but I pulled out some ones that are specifically helpful to empathic people and people that are sensitive, plus things that are going on right now. So I wanted to start with probably the two most important. And the first one is, and he changes the label. So if you have a version of this and the label looks different, but it's called Empath Shield, it's the same thing. So Empath Shield is an oil that, it's the only oil I have ever come across that actually helps protect the energetic field. So unlike filtering your field, which will work on a pretty consistent basis day in and day out, you set it once and forget it. Empath Shield's a great thing to carry around, like if you're going into an environment that's going to be hectic or crazy or busy, and you know that, or you're going into a family holiday and your family stuff overloads you. So, these all come in these little roller ball, applications. And there is no science to where you put them on. I would tell you to put them on where you feel called to do so. So sometimes you can put them on your wrists, you can put them on the points on your ear, behind the ears, on your solar plexus, whatever feels resonant for you. And I want to take a minute. There is no store to get these from. You can message him through the Facebook app, but I got a hold of him and got an email address so that I could share it with you all. And it is high, H-I-G-H, power, P-O-W-E-R, oils, O-I-L-S, @gmail.com. Pretty simple. And in addition to just getting a hold of him and buying individual oils, he does do these consultations. So for, I think it's about $100, you get about an hour consultation, and it usually comes with at least 2 free oils as part of that. And he's really good about helping you sort out, like you might go into it thinking that you know what you need, and you might be right. But it also might be through talking to him, he's got something that's better than what you're looking for exactly what's going on with you. So, but the empath oil is probably something I would recommend everybody have. And the other one that seems crucially important, and I actually think that this oil is beneficial to pretty much anybody that's not living in the jungle, you know, and it's called earth elemental oil. And what's really interesting about this oil, so to give you a little bit of history with my experience with these oils. So I've tested a lot of products for a lot of people. I've come across a lot of things in my life. And when Chris brought these oils to me to check, I honestly didn't have much expectation of them being any different than any of the other oils I've seen in my life or products that have great intentions and don't follow through necessarily with their claim. And he handed them to me blind. And I was truthfully blown away, which is a pretty hard thing to happen, you know, to me. I just am not blown away with things. And this earth elemental oil is one of the best things I've ever seen for actually kind of bringing that earthy energy into your system. So if you live in the city and you're, you know, spending a lot of time on concrete, around a lot of buildings, you're not in the woods, we're built to really be connected to nature. And nature is the empath's like exhale. It helps balance our energy. It brings us into balance with nature itself. So, you know, one of the best things that we can ever do for ourselves is go get out in nature and breathe and walk, especially if you're barefoot, getting your bare feet on ground, incredibly helpful, laying on the ground, sleeping on the ground. But we can't always do that all of the time, or even on a daily basis. So what I've found is that this earth elemental oil really creates pretty much the equivalent of that. I don't know how to tell you about how it works because I don't know why it works, but it does. And it produces the same effect in the system or really close to it as if you were out in nature breathing and walking and decompressing. So that big exhale you get when you go out, you know, and walk through the woods, you know, that is what this does. So anybody that, like I said, living in the city, working in high-rise buildings, you know, not getting enough nature time, that would be my recommendation to you. While we're talking a little bit about earthy things, I would also like to tell you that, you know, if that is your story, if you are living in an apartment complex, if you are working in buildings, like houseplants, the kind of houseplants typically that grow in dirt, so not necessarily air plants, and not sometimes orchids, but plants that grow in dirt seem to be incredibly helpful for empaths to have in their space. You don't have to be the crazy plant lady, you know, like I am, but it works. And, you know, learning to balance, they'll balance the energy in your space. So if you have a room that's got a bunch of houseplants in it, it's going to feel dramatically different energetically, particularly to people like you all, you know, because you're sensitive to those energies. So houseplants are your friend. And, you know, when you can't get out in nature, and if you don't have access to that, or you don't want to try your green thumb, you know, I would also recommend that you get that earth elemental oil. A couple of others that seem to be really helpful here is the Fiery Wall Defense Ultimate Edition. So again, Fiery Wall Defense Ultimate Edition. Most of you aren't going to need this oil, but I'm telling you about it because those of you that do need it bad. And, you know, from an empath standpoint, the empath oil is going to filter energies from other people and environments. So think ambient, right? The energies of a person in the room, the energies of, you know, left in the space. But energies are, you know, not the only, like ambient energies are not the only thing in the space. There are all kinds of entities in the universe, particularly in our plane the last couple of years as the plane changes vibration. And Some of you are going to have a little more trouble with entities, or there's a couple of ways that that happens. We can get an entourage. So when you're an empath or an intuitive person, it's sort of like being a brighter light bulb in the room. Don't think that that makes you a better human being than somebody that's not an empath. That's not true. But think light bulb, you know, the brightest light outside is going to get more moths to it. The same is true for empathic people, and most of them don't realize that. So you have a vibratory range that makes you more seen by other entities. And it's not like entities are all bad and out to get you and that sort of thing, but you know, like shiny squirrel ball, they're going to follow that. And so I see a lot of empaths who have what I call an entourage following them around. Inherently not too terrible, but can take a drain on your system. The next level up from having an entourage would be to have what I would call an attachment, some kind of an entity that might be trying to hook into your system in some form. And then the worst level of that is some form of possession, which most people will never deal with. But pretty much that oil is going to take care of that. Now, if you are having a serious problem that this oil doesn't take care of, there are people that will help you with that. But, you know, if you believe that you are a person who is really struggling with entity type of energy, that would be, you know, what I would recommend to you to start with, because that's a whole different ball game than dealing with just Mary Jo's sadness. So. And then right now, one of the things that I think is really helpful, there's two of them in, well, actually there's several of them in the moment. He makes an oil called Ultimate Peace. You know, the space that we're in, particularly right now, is really stressful for a lot of people. You're picking up collective conscious energy that is anything but peaceful. So you have your own processes going on, you have your own purge, and hopefully you are really doing some self-examining and looking at your own wants and what you don't want and what's resonant, what's in alignment with you. That is not necessarily a peaceful situation. And I don't want you to become so peaceful that you're not looking at your stuff, because that's not helpful either. But you don't have to drive, you know, through the complete muck to get the point made. So if you need some help feeling a little greater sense of peace and dealing with all these energies that are going on, the Ultimate Peace Oil is good for that. Probably one of my favorites is this one called Breath of Life. And, you know, the COVID virus right now is a lung virus. And even if that weren't going on, this particular oil seems to bring into the system, like when I use it, the first thing I notice is that I feel cool, as if I took a big cool breath, like when you walk outside in the winter, but not painful, and I'm not freezing. But it seems to activate the breathwork kind of energy systems in the body that are incredibly helpful for balancing, centering, you know, and grounding. And I use that term loosely here. But, you know, if I were going to pick three oils to have, like in my arsenal, Breath of Life would be one of them. Empath Shield would be one of them. The Earth Elemental Oil would be one of them. And this Breath of Life oil. Those are the three biggies, particularly because as empaths, we get tight and tense. And, you know, we do this thing where the more stress we have, we get like this. We start trying to wear our, you know, our shoulders like earrings, and we don't realize that. And, you know, this compression also, you know, our shoulders start coming forward. And so we end up kind of like this without realizing it. And that compresses your lungs. You're not actually breathing very well. And we can't always remember to do this. And this helps us kind of realign with all of that. Touching base real quick on a couple of the other ones. He's got a new oil out called Gratitude Boost that I've been checking out for the last week or so. And you know, sometimes, especially when you're digging through your own muck or when the world is a crazy place, it's really challenging to find something to be grateful for. And what I have learned about this in the 1 week that I've been playing with it, that is, if you are having a hurdle to finding gratitude, it's going to point that out to you. That's what it's doing to me anyway. There's two oils that I forever get confused with one another. system restore, and energy restore. So I just want to make sure, I want to look at my notes so I make sure I tell them to you the right way. So system restore is really about calibrating all of your energy systems together, right? So this energy cyclical system with this energy cyclical system, think of it like making sure that the gears in your watch are all working and cycling together. So it's going to bring all of that into alignment. The energy restore one is really more about bringing energy in if you have depleted yourself. So that's one of the things that empaths really struggle with, is this sense of like being sucked dry. You know, there's nothing left in me. And if you need help in getting back in balance by, you know, intaking energy, and a lot of empaths have a lot of service wiring. They have difficulty in receivership. So we're really good about giving, but we're not really good about receiving, or even remembering that, like, oh, I've got to fill my own fuel tank in some form. Energy restore is really good for that. It works pretty quickly. There is 2 oils that are not really specific to empaths. I think they're good oils to have. So I'm going to mention them to you. One of them is called Ultimate Personal Power, which is really good for anybody who's having a self-worth issue or a self-valuing issue, which can be particularly challenging these days as we kind of sort through some things and determining what our wants and resonances are. And the other one is called Angel Sync. And this oil is the first one that I ever tested, and really is the one that kind of blew my mind first. And it's great at helping you get that sense of energetic connection to the divine and feeling that in your system. So it's always present, but you don't always feel that, and it's not always in obvious ways. So if you feel like that's something that you need or something that is resonant for you, you know, those are helpful. But sometimes, you know, just knowing what to do or eating the right foods is not enough. Sometimes we need a little help from something else. And I wanted to make sure you guys had those tools. Where are we time-wise? We are cruising along. That is awesome. Any questions about any of those oils? Nope, you're all good. Awesome. Okay. So flower essence services. Some of you may be familiar with that brand. Most of you are probably more familiar with the brand Bach. So you're probably used to hearing Bach flower remedies. And Dr. Bach had a very specific protocol for making flower essences. And after he died, his son and his wife, as I understand it, continued to make those flower essences in that way. And so when flower essences first came into my world, Bach flower remedies were a great thing to use. And they made a product called Rescue Remedy, which you can still purchase. So you can go to like Whole Foods and places like that. A lot of places are going to carry Bach flower remedies. And I'll show you, you know, again, not always showing up the best in this video because of the lighting, but yeah, you can't see that very well. They're liquid flower essences in an alcohol base. And we'll touch base on that in a second here. But eventually that company got sold to Nelson Incorporated. And one day I noticed that Rescue Remedy wasn't working anymore. I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. And doing a little bit of homework, found out this story that I'm telling you. And they no longer make, Bach no longer makes their flower essences according to Dr. Bach's protocol. There is a company that does make their flower essences from that original protocol, and they are gathering their flowers for them, almost all of them, their sources, from the same general areas in the world that, sometimes the same exact field, that Dr. Bach did when he created all these and made that study. And that company is called Flower Essence Services. Again, I'm going to hold the bottle up, but I know you can't see them very well. And Rescue Remedy had 5 flower essences in it. So, you know, what F.E.S. calls theirs is 5-flower formula. So if you are looking for a Rescue Remedy, stick it on a bee sting, on a cut, you're having a panic attack, you're going to want to get 5-flower formula or something else that's being made that's quality along that realm. So this, you know, and Flower Essence Services makes these little bottles. So this is a really big bottle. Unless it's something like 5-flower remedy, I can't imagine you'd need a big bottle like this unless you're working with it and making tinctures for other people. But this is the smaller version. So let's talk a little bit about those flower essence services, or those flower essences. There's two ways to use flower essences. The most common that most people are going to be familiar with is the dropping it on your tongue. So if you look at these, you know, they all come in like a little dropper top. That bottle's empty, so I must have just kept it for some other reason. But, you know, they're going to have a liquid in them, and you're just going to dose by drops. So it might be like 3 drops on your tongue or under your tongue if you're dealing with 1 or 2 flower essences is all you're working with. If you are a problem, if you have a problem with alcohol and you don't want to put any alcohol into your system, there is another method for using these that actually comes up far more often in sessions than taking them orally. So it's not very common that in a session, people are recommended to take it on their tongue. More often than not, they're instructed to body map it. And so I want to share a couple of books with you that if you are interested in using flower essences, and they will definitely move some stuff in you and really help you. We're going to go over a couple of them that are incredibly important right now. But these 2 books are a great study guide. The first one is called The New Bach Flower Remedies. And the guy's name is Dietmar Kramer. You can get them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you have a health food store, they might carry it. If they carry a book section. But this guy, this Dietmar Kramer, has spent about 30 years studying Bach flower essences and from a psychological setting, like in psychological settings, and has developed a way of like figuring out which flower essences you need. And it breaks them into groupings. So this book really goes through all of that. And there's a questionnaire in here. So if you're looking at this book, it's going to be on page 94. But it goes through and asks you a question, and you give your answer, and your answer will correspond with a particular flower essence. So you kind of keep track of that. It's not a very long questionnaire, but it will help you learn which ones are the greatest need in your system. And that's a real challenge if you don't have some way of discerning that. But the primary point is this other book, which looks, don't get them confused because they look almost identical, right? Same kind of cover. And it's the same author. And it's called The New Bach Flower Body Maps. And what this book does is this book has broken the human body out into quadrants, every single inch of it. All of your private parts, everything is in the book, broken out into quadrants. And let's say you did the questionnaire, or you just happen to know what it is that you want to use. So let's talk about Star of Bethlehem. Star of Bethlehem is probably the most important Bach flower remedy for an empath. It really, every human being probably needs it. Star of Bethlehem is for shock, trauma, and grief, which, you know, if you've been born, you've got shock. And everyone has some form of perceptual trauma or perceptual grief in their current life or in their karmic life somewhere. So Star of Bethlehem is the tool. It is also the primary ingredient in the rescue remedy or 5-flower formula, whichever company you're working with there. So let's say you're really going through some stuff. Maybe you lost a loved one. Maybe you're super stressed out. Maybe all your baggage is coming up. Who knows what's going on? And you want to use Star of Bethlehem to help your system rebalance itself. And remember, you're an empath, so you're sensitive. So these things have, while they might have a more subtle impact on someone else, they're going to have a more dramatic impact on you. So what you do is it's alphabetical in here. So you would flip all the way back to Star of Bethlehem. Let's find it. And I'm going to see if I can get that in the shot. So this right here is where Star of Bethlehem starts, right? The page before is scleranthus. We're not dealing with that. We're dealing with Star of Bethlehem. So it starts right here. Every time you see a picture of a torso in the body, it's going to look like this. And the quadrants will always be the same. But this darkened area right here is the area that you're going to want to get the Star of Bethlehem in on the body. And then, there's a description at the bottom that will tell you, where that is if you're struggling to figure that out. And then we go to the next section, right? So this part of the spine and this part of around the eye. And if you look at the picture, you're like, oh, I don't know, is that like my right eye or my left eye? You look down at the bottom and it will tell you, left eyebrow and left eye. So let's look at this for a second. This spot right here is on your spine. How many of you think you could, with your finger, fill in that quadrant, reaching behind you, right? Probably not very many. One of the things that's important to know is that you don't actually have to fill in the whole quadrant. It's not a paint by number. You don't have to fill it to the edge. You want to get the Bach flower remedy anywhere in that quadrant, right? So if you got it on your finger and you swipe down through here, it's going to be fine. It's okay that you got it in the other quadrants. You just want to make sure you get it in this one. So for things like that, one of the things that I would do, let me find my empty bottle so I'm not dropping stuff down the back of me. If you keep the book, like if you're a morning shower person, or I get up and I get dressed in the morning, it's a good thing to use to start your day when you're using Bach flower remedies to start your day with them. And you get out of the shower, you get all dried off, do whatever you're going to do before you put your clothes on. You pull open your book and you're like, okay, Star of Bethlehem. I'm going to put a drop on my finger. I'm going to swipe it in that area, right, that the book is showing. I'm just going to swipe it in that area. But I can't get my arm back there, right? Like that's not easy for me to do. So what I might do is I might get a little bit and I might lean over and drop it on my back and stand up and let it just roll through that quadrant on my spine. So, and you don't have to hit every area that, every quadrant that the book will tell you to. The more of them you can get, the better. But if you keep going through this book, you'll see, there's the spine, there's a little bit of the forehead and around the left eye. There's the inside of one of the arms and the right calf. We're still at Star of Bethlehem is still going to say that up there at the top, right? And the outside of the right foot. Now over here, we move over to Sweet Chestnut. We don't need that one. So there's, a handful of spots that you would hit every day if you're body mapping for flower essences. One of the flower essences that so Star of Bethlehem is a great thing to use no matter what's going on in your life. There aren't flower essences except one that I would ever recommend to you that you actually carry with you. And that flower, and you're welcome to body map it too, especially if you're having this problem in a bigger way in your life, but I'd still carry it with you. And it's called Centauri. I think I'm saying it right. Centauri. And Centauri, closes the field, so to speak. Centauri is the flower essence that I carried with me for a long time, just because I was getting kind of freaked out about going into Walmart or going into the grocery store. I really wanted to go to a party, but man, I was just blown and I needed something extra. I felt like I needed something extra. So Centauri is the thing that I would like, and I would drop it on my tongue. So I'm not standing out in the parking lot of the grocery store, trying to body map stuff all over me. Just drop a couple drops on my tongue and I went. The other thing that Centauri is really helpful for is if you have trouble saying no, or you say no, and then people are like, well, what do you mean? And then you backpedal. Like if you have trouble saying no to to other people to try to say in what's resonant for you, Centauri is your friend. And you can body map it, or you can use it orally. And then a couple of the others that are really helpful in case you are into flower remedies. Elm, which is, for overwhelm. So remember, Star of Bethlehem, shock, trauma, and grief, which we all have. With empaths, we're often being victimized on a regular basis, particularly if we haven't filtered our field or we don't have the skill sets for working with our own empathic wiring. You're going to be in a state of overwhelm. So elm is the flower remedy, and I have a tendency to keep calling them Bach flower remedies, even though I wouldn't buy Bach brand at this point, for overwhelm. Holly is for anger, jealousy, and hatred. Now, most empaths are service people, and they don't think of themselves as having anger and jealousy and hatred in them. But you probably have someone else's in your system The other piece of that is when you're empathic, particularly if you've been dealing with it long term, you often have the kind of anger and frustration residing in your system that you're not thinking about, like a level of resentment because people don't get you, because things are more difficult or more challenging for you. So, not everybody's going to want to deal with that, or need that. But if you are a super kind, loving, cheery person and you grew up in a household with a parent who was always really angry, you probably have it in your field because you would have just sucked it up, all the time. And it's probably sitting in your body, making your liver sluggish every day. So holly is a great one to use. While we're talking about that, a heads up around Bach flower remedies. It's easy to look at these and think, they're just flower essences. This will be a piece of cake. And sometimes it is. But sometimes what they do is open the floodgates for that energy to move. So, you can use combinations, and a lot of people will make a tincture. So they'll take a bottle, any kind of bottle, take an empty bottle, and they'll put alcohol in it, and then they'll use the questionnaire in that book that we were talking about, and they'll pick, 5, 6, 7, maybe 3 Bach flower remedies that they need, and they'll drop, like if you needed Star of Bethlehem the most, you might put 5 drops of that in. And you needed Centauri the next, you might put in 4 of those. And walnut for new beginnings, which is a good one for right now because everybody is in this new beginning, this reset place. So walnut is your friend right now, no matter who you are. But walnuts last, so we're going to put 3 drops in that. And, every day you can't body map that, right, because you've got a mixture, but you can drop it on your tongue every day. You could take it on Friday morning. I would recommend if you're going to start body mapping or you're going to take Bach flower remedies, flower essences orally, that you try to start on the day right before you have days off if you work. So, if you work Monday through Friday, I'd maybe take them Friday morning or Friday afternoon because Friday night you could have a meltdown, right? Meltdowns are good. They help us move a lot of energy out of our system, but they're not necessarily the thing you want to be having before that meeting with your boss at 2 o'clock or, before you go into a review or whatever it is that you're doing. So, starting them on a weekend or before a day off is helpful. Less is better. One of the things that's really important for empaths to remember is it is not a go big or go home kind of situation. Most of you are hypersensitive and you need to be dealing with supplements and nutrition and protocols from a homeopathic mentality, which is the smallest possible dose to elicit a response. So, if your supplement says take 2 to 4 tablets a day, you might start with 1, maybe 2, definitely not the 4. Right? If most people go get acupuncture for an hour, you might be able to tolerate that, but you might need to tell your acupuncturist, especially when you first start going, hey, I'm super sensitive, and so check on me in 15 minutes because I might be done, or I might need to get off this table. So, don't feel bad about, going small. It is the smallest possible dose to elicit a response, so that's what's healthy for you. So, you don't have to go crazy with these flower essences. Little is perfectly fine, and it still moves energy. The other one that is really helpful for empaths, and it's helpful for empaths at any point, just like the holly was for anger, is pine. One of the big emotional issues that service-based people have and that empaths have is guilt, right? So we're back to like the inability to say no, which Centauri helps you with. So if you're really struggling with that, Centauri, Star of Bethlehem, pine, right? Star of Bethlehem for the shock, trauma, and grief, holly for the anger, and pine for the guilt, or Centauri for the, the ability to say no, and pine so that you don't feel super guilty for saying no, right? Now, that's a whole nother subject about whether it's in balance for you to be saying no to things or not, but that's one of the challenges that we have is because the culture tends to teach us that we're supposed to be in service to other people. And if we say no, we're bad, and we should feel guilty for taking care of ourselves and guilty for saying no. So guilt is a very, very common emotional burden carried around in empathic and sensitive people, and pine is very helpful for that. If you start taking pine, whether you're body mapping it or taking it on your tongue, you definitely have sort of a crying meltdown. And then that's not, I don't want to tell you that everybody's going to have that, because that's not true. But if you have a lot of that, it can really move that energy, especially right up front in the first day or two, and move a lot of that out. And then you get a balance, and then you keep working with that, and it helps process that out in a better balanced way. We talked a little bit about walnut. Walnut's got a lot of uses to it, but for new beginnings. So anytime like somebody's gotten a divorce, and they're going to, or they're changing jobs, or they've moved locations, or they, their kids just moved out of the house. Anytime there's a new beginning going on in your life, walnut is a good flower essence to use. And it really helps you feel like strong in that, secure in that, helps you get the energy moving for that new thing that you're doing. And when you partner that with the Star of Bethlehem for shock, trauma, and grief, a lot of that fear around starting this new project, you've got the energy for moving forward, and you're dealing with some of the fear that might prevent you from that forward movement. So that's a good combination to use. And then the last one that I want to talk about is white chestnut. And white chestnut is one that most people don't know about, or they don't work very much with, but it is like built for an empath. It's the one that you use when you seem to not have the ability to prevent other people's emotions and arguments from getting into you, right? So people are arguing with you about something, and and you're feeling like this in your life, like every time that happens, or anytime somebody disagrees with you, you're feeling like you can't get it out of you. You want to use white chestnut, and it's typically people that need white chestnut aren't going to just need it on a situational basis. So that's a really good one to take on a regular basis, or to body map. And if you're dealing with, these problems, and that's not situational, so like rather than dropping Centauri on your tongue before you go into the grocery store or the party, which is situational, if you're trying to use Centauri to deal with like bringing better balance and your ability to say no or defend, if you will, against outside energies long term, you want to use them every day for about 30 days. So that's kind of the benchmark with flower essences, is that 30-day mark. And, there's a couple of others. I pulled my sheet up from the empath class that I just wanted to go over with you. If you're taking notes, agrimony for those who avoid confrontation at all costs due to stress. Sound like any of you? Dodgers, weavers, to avoid that confrontational process. Centauri, we talked about. Chicory for those who overcare for others. So we talked a little bit about, empaths having a tendency to also be service wired. And when you couple that with a cultural, like, good people take care of other people kind of thing, there's a real tendency in empaths to like overcare in an out of balance way. You can't ever care too much about someone, but you can care in a way that puts you out of balance or puts you in service where you're not staying in balance. So chicory is really good for that. If you're feeling overly obligated towards the care of friends, neighbors, relatives, kids, to help with that. Clematis, if you're getting, if your empathic stuff has gotten to a place of overwhelm and you start noticing that you're spacing out, and your friends are saying, you just asked me that. I just told you this yesterday. Don't you remember we had this conversation the other day? You're going to want to use clematis. Elm, again, we talked about for being overwhelmed. Gorse, I have some cautionary statements around gorse. It really is for intense hopelessness, feelings of despair, people that feel like they're ready to give up, give in, and they can't imagine that things will get any better. So like real, true hopelessness. But if you don't need gorse, like if you're not really feeling that despairing, that hopeless, gorse can sometimes dredge up those emotions in a way that it's not going to produce things that don't exist in you, but it can dredge them up in a way when you're not able to stay in balance with yourself, can actually make your day a little bit harder. So if you're going to take gorse, I would strongly recommend that you take it with Star of Bethlehem, so that you're not kind of re-traumatizing yourself in those processes. Hornbeam for feeling of not having any strength left to carry the burden of life placed upon them. And right now, probably more than ever, from a collective standpoint, I mean, your own lives might have some variance in that, but empaths are getting really walloped these days with the collective conscious energy. And hornbeam is like when you feel like the weight of the world is on you. And just doing daily tasks is too much. Like, I got to sweep the floor and I'm mad about it. Or, you know, I got to do laundry and it's just too much. I just can't do it. So if you're feeling overwhelmed at that level, hornbeam is a good one. Mimulus helps you speak your emotional truths, particularly around the fears that you might be having. So if you struggle with communicating and you're sensitive, Mimulus is good. Mustard for deep gloom. Oak. So oak is for kind of pushing past exhaustion. And there's a time and a place for that. It's important, I think, for you to really be paying attention to where your exhaustion levels are. Where is your balance point? And we can all push past that. Sometimes our situation requires from it, like I got to suck it up right now and do this thing. But if you're doing that on a regular basis, like don't be using oak to plow through and overwhelm yourself on an ongoing basis. But if you need that little like, I'm overloaded and I got to get through this piece right here, oak can help you with that. We talked about pine, red chestnut when you have too much concern for other people, rock rose, terror and panic. So Star of Bethlehem, shock, trauma, grief. Rock rose, terror and panic. Big difference, right? Don't use rock rose if you're not kind of having that particular issue. You know, you would be having real anxiousness and anxiety, real deep-rooted panicky fear. We talked about Star of Bethlehem, walnut, white chestnut, wild rose, apathy. If you're feeling like, meh, which is not true to your character, like normally you're a caring person or normally, but anymore you're just like, whatever, doesn't matter. If that's the best you've got. So wild rose is really good for that. And 5-flower formula. So 5-flower formula is something that I'm super glad I found this bottle of it today because I thought I was out. But I used to carry it in my car. And so if I was out anywhere, I was at a party or I was at a friend's house or, you know, I was out walking around the woods, whether I got stung with a bee or jabbed a thorn into my foot or ran into someone that just sort of blew my field out or like unloaded on me in some way, like go to the car, drop some Star of Bethlehem or Rescue Remedy, which is, you know, Star of Bethlehem's the primary ingredient in there, on my tongue, and off you go. You'll be amazed at how fast it shifts that around for you. So I want to take a break here for just a minute. We don't have a lot left in class. I do want to go over the crystals that are particularly helpful for empathic people. There's a handful of them, but we've been in here for about an hour and 10 minutes, and some of you might need a restroom break or to grab something to drink. So let's take about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back right after that. And then, Darlene, I see your hand up, and I'll answer your question just as soon as we come back. All right? See you guys in 5 minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome back to part 2, the last little piece of Empath Tools for Now, part 2, class 2 of that. One of the last things I want to mention about Bach flower remedies, and then I'll get to Darlene's question here, is that not all health food stores carry them. I know that Whole Foods used to carry Bach flower remedies. They're easy to get online. Again, I don't particularly use the Bach version. I use Flower Essence Services, and if you're searching for those, it's often abbreviated as F.E.S. They also make more than the Bach. I think the original Bach ones were like 31 or 32 flower essences, and F.E.S. makes a boatload of them. They also sell a really big book. It's like this thick with an outline for every single one of those flower essences that you can use if you're interested in that. So let me get to Darlene here for a second. I'm going to unmute you, Darlene.
Okay.
How you doing, honey?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good. What's going on? What can I answer for you?
I'm kind of curious. Do you have a timeline on when they were sold out of the family, the Bach flower essences?
So I'm trying to think when I switched. I started using Rescue Remedy in the 90s, like early mid 90s, and it worked. It was after 2000. So maybe 2002, 3, 4, somewhere in there. That I noticed it wasn't working. I kept using it, and I kept wondering why it wasn't shifting. Why it wasn't doing for me what it once did for me or for anybody else my kids that I was using it on. But I don't remember the exact date that Nelson changed the way they are doing that. So sorry, I don't have a technical answer off the top of my head for you.
No, that's okay. I tried to Google it and I couldn't find anything on it. So I just might not have been looking in the right places. I have a whole box. I just ran across a whole set that was, I know that they were somewhere in the 2000s.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah. I'll have to.
Yeah. I remember because, I'm a researcher. If there's something that the other side's not answering for me, which is pretty common for me, then I'll dig into it. And I know I found that online. So if I find that, I'll look for that. And if I find it, I will shoot it over to you, either, in email, if I have an email address for you, or a Facebook link, something like that. So,
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, because that is helpful. I mean, some of the things that I had were old. And what's nice about flower essences is that because they're in an alcohol base and dark glass, unless they've been exposed to really high temperatures, they last a long time. They're not going to go bad. So, you might spend $5 for a bottle of them, or, hundreds of, if you're buying the whole set of things, and they'll keep, for a long period of time, and just replace the ones that you use the most often when they become empty. So yeah, it would be great if you could, hang on to those, because they're still, they were still being made, the way that you'd want them to. Thanks for the question. Let me see. Joanna has a question. I'm going to unmute you, Joanna. Well, I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, there you are. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I can hardly hear you very well. Can you speak up just a little bit?
No. Let me see if I can attach a mic.
Oh, there you are. I can hear you.
Okay, good. So I have two questions about
Sure.
the flower essences. If you feel like you need like 10 of these flower essences, like you're looking at them, like how do you kind of discern what to
Okay.
use?
So, I adhere to kind of the regular, like what most people would go with that, because the other side agreed with it. You really wouldn't want to use more than 7 of them. If you're making a tincture of your own, I would not recommend putting more than 7 different flower essences in that tincture. So that would be the max, and that would be like you're going to tackle everything at once.
Gotcha.
So sometimes it might be things that are really struggling, but you might want to throw some supportive ones in there too. And I, the funny thing about these books is I got this body mapping book because my doctor is very holistic, and my partner had died unexpectedly of a heart attack, and I was struggling. And she put me on some Bach flower remedies, and I was familiar with using them already, but she asked me to get the body mapping book. And I accidentally got this flower therapy book. I just ordered the wrong one. And I thought, well, nothing happens by accident. So I flipped through it. And that questionnaire that we were talking about, so let me give you all an example of how this questionnaire works. Let me see how many questions there are in it. Oh, that's going to be too much to deal with. But 38 total questions. So the very first question in here, and it tells you exactly how to use this questionnaire too. So it's a great tool for discerning, like you might think you know what your issue is, or you might think you know what you need, but if you do this process, it might give you better clarity. So the first question is, are there situations in your life in which you are afraid? And the answers are, you use aspen if it's vague, indefinable fear. You use mimulus if it's a concrete fear. You use rock rose if it's acute panic. You use cherry plum if you have a fear of going crazy and freaking out. Red chestnut if you're just worrying about other people. And larch, expectation, anxiety, fear of failure, or making a fool of oneself. Centauri if you have fear of not being acknowledged. Crabapple for fear of infections, right? This is pretty specific. And so what I would do is I would make a list. I made a list of all 32, or however many there are, 31, on a piece of paper. And every time, let's say let's say, are there situations in which you feel afraid? And maybe I was having fear of going crazy and freaking out, which is cherry plum. I would put a little hash mark next to cherry plum in my list, right? And I did every question that way. I already have everything listed out, right? There's not every option for each question, but I'd hash mark them. And then at the end of the questionnaire, I would look and see, okay, what's got the most hash marks next to it? That's the primary one that I need. And what has the second greatest number of hash marks in it? And that's the secondary one that I need. And so I would determine not only what was going in my tincture, but how much was going in my tincture. So if I had, 11 hash marks for walnut, I'm going to put the most drops of walnut in my tincture. And I got high proof liquor, like 151 or something like that, and put it in the bottle because you want it diluted. Remember the homeopathic mentality, the smallest possible dose to elicit a response. So you get a bottle and you put really good quality alcohol in there, and then you put your drops. So maybe I would put 7 drops of Centauri in there if that was the biggest one, and then maybe 5 drops of the next one. So if you're using 7 flower essences, you could do the strongest one at 7 drops, the next one at 6 drops, the next one at 5 drops, or maybe there's a big difference. Maybe you had like 13 hash marks for Centauri, and the next greatest thing was like 5, right? So you might do, rather than 7, 6, 5, that way you might do a lot of the first one and then drop it, quite a number of drops for the second one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Did that answer both your questions there, or did you have something else you wanted to ask?
It answered the first question. The second question was about the high power oils that you were talking about before, or rather specifically the fiery wall defense one.
Yeah.
You were talking about about having entities and entourages and stuff like that. If you're not sensitive enough to be able to tell if that's within your field, and like, for instance, if I'm feeling a special level of frustrated for weeks on end and it just keeps coming, how do I tell if that's not just something that I have to work through, or if there's an entity or an entourage that's encouraging this going
right
on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's pretty unusual. It's not, in empaths, it's probably a higher percentage, empaths and intuitive people, to have a higher percentage of that kind of interaction, simply because you are kind of a walking neon sign that says, hey, I might perceive you. And like anything in the universe, interaction is the name of the game. Without going to someone who would be able to tell you that, I would tell you, if you're trying to figure that out on your own, I would be paying attention to, is my level of frustration, in this case, you're using the emotion of frustration. So do I have any reason that I can discern for myself that I might be having current frustration or purging frustration out of my system? And that is something to really be looking at if you're an empath right now, because the empath is getting a break in some ways and walloped in the other. So we're removed from Walmart, parties, work environments in most cases right now, and picking up collective consciousness. But that where my field is not overlapping the field of other people right now, there's this kind of, right? And when the system is constantly inundated every day, it spends all of its energy just trying to deal with the day. It can't really do any purge. That's why you're intaking more energy than the system can process out. So the system is forever just dealing with whatever's going on in the moment. When you get a break from that, the system will often start like, oh, we've got time now. Let's throw this up. And it will start literally throwing up, just like you'd throw up something out of your stomach energetically. So, if you're not feeling any particular trigger or can't discern a trigger around why you might be feeling frustrated, and you're not picking it up from other people, or maybe you don't know. So like with the high power oils, I would use the Empath Shield first. And I would put that on every day and just see, like, am I feeling better? If you're feeling better from putting on Empath Shield, then that frustration is not yours. That's someone else's, and it's not an entity per se, right? It's energy in the collective conscious. If Empath Shield wasn't working, then I would try Fiery Defense Wall. If we're sticking with high power oils, then I would try fiery defense wool. And if that did the trick, then you know what's going on there. And fiery defense wool has had several, has had its own evolution. So there used to be like fiery defense wool and then one called Aegis, which was for particularly challenging entities. And it ended up that he just ended up merging them both together. So it's pretty potent and should take care of about anything. And if it doesn't, you know, then you're going to want to contact somebody to figure out like what else is going on there, right? But I would tell you to start with checking your own purge, you know. And I'll tell you tomorrow. So for everybody who's in this class, you know, we've been doing these classes on Zoom, and we've been trying to live stream them to Facebook, which, you know, Facebook doesn't play nice with Zoom. It doesn't always work out very well. But there is a free class tomorrow on Facebook that actually is the platform. And it is all about understanding the difference between what you want and what's resonant, because they are very different things. And it's very important to know that difference. And that tool that I'm teaching, you know, tomorrow around that is a tool that can help you actually figure out like that question, Joanna, you know? Okay. All right. Let me see where else we are here. Somehow, Joanna, you got muted there. Devin, how you doing, Devin?
Hey, Julie. I'm doing
Good to
great.
see you.
You too. So my question is, what are your recommendations to empaths about consuming alcohol and marijuana?
So, you know, there is no standard pat answer for anything that you know, put into the system. I'm sure there's somebody on the planet who the other side would say, yeah, you need meth. You know, I mean, I haven't seen that in my personal experience, but so alcohol and cannabis are medicine or self-medicating. And it would depend on the person. For the most part, I've not seen the other side be like have a lot of issue with cannabis. The cannabis itself, they don't have an issue with. The reason behind the use of cannabis is the thing that sometimes comes up. Also, if you're under like 24 and you're using cannabis, one of the downsides to cannabis is that it kind of can stunt, particularly if you're using it a lot, and a lot being more than, you know, twice a week, it can inhibit your emotional development. So if you start using cannabis before you're 24, and it starts out as a social thing, but then like, oh my God, school's so stressful, or my mom's yelling at me, or, you know, I lost my job, any of these things, and you're using it with any regularity, the normal emotional development skills that you have, and empaths are, you know, really overloaded. So they're always looking for some way to relax, and cannabis, you know, will do that. But it can also kind of be a catch-22 because then you don't develop the skill sets for dealing with those emotional issues. And then you quit using cannabis and you're like screwed because you didn't develop this. So sometimes, and that's true for alcohol too, you know, alcohol doesn't have a lot of, it doesn't have nearly as much benefit in the system. And alcohol is usually an attempt to self-numb, self-medicate when, you know, for an empath. Also, empaths are often really overloaded. So it'll be like one of the few ways that they can relax. It's not recommended. Alcohol is a much bigger problem. The alcohol is going to be more inclined to make an empath undefended, you know, and uptake the energies of another person. The same is true, you know, if you're, you can be a super centered person and you can take a psychedelic and it can make you, you know, it can make anybody vulnerable to entities and energies, but empaths more so. So, you know, you just want to be careful with those things and look at why am I doing this, right? So if I'm doing this because I'm stressed, rather than from a medicine standpoint, then are there other tools that I can use to alleviate my stress? And then my cannabis use or my alcohol use can be reserved for, you know, something else. So, you know, we all have a need to cope and process. It's a fine line between, this helps me cope, and this is inhibiting my growth and my skill process. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
You're welcome. All right. Let's see. Joanna, you got one more question there?
Yeah, I do.
Sure.
I had a question about animal versus plant diet, but that last question actually just got me thinking, since I know plenty of people that had used cannabis every
Yeah.
single day, all day, every day, under the age of 24.
Honey,
Yes.
take a big breath.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Anyway, so is there a way to fix that emotional inhibition that's happened?
Well,
aside from
to fix what emotional, like the overload and the need to kind of run and hide?
I mean, you said that using it constantly under the age of 24, it
inhibits your development.
Emotional growth or development. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I mean, anybody can learn skills for how to deal with emotions and how to process things at any age, whether you're 4 or 70. There's no limit to when you can reprogram your system or learn new skills. The bigger challenge is that when we're young, the culture allows for screwing things up and not knowing things easier, and it's a cultural problem in many regards. When you're 18 and you make poor decisions by someone's standard, or you don't know how to handle a situation, a lot of that's kind of the age range where people would be like, you're 18, you ought to be figuring that out. And the other half of the people would be like, you're only 18, you're not supposed to know that yet. But as you get through those 21, 23, 24, 25, there's a greater expectation in the people around you, friends, family, culture, community, that you should get your shit together by now. So there's less room for people to grow. So let's just make an example out of that. Let's say you used cannabis as a coping mechanism, and maybe you really needed it, right? Like your situation was like, there is no learning skills here. I just got to survive this. So now you're 27, 28, 29. You decide you don't want to use cannabis in that way or as much, whatever's going on, and you come out of that. But you have a stunted emotional development in this particular area, or maybe in several areas. Maybe it got stunted when you started using cannabis at 16 or 17, right? So in other ways, you have matured and you're like maybe on par, like not really like there is a par, but let's just use it as an example, on par for other 27, 28, 29-year-olds. But this emotional development of yours in this particular area is like a 16-year-old, right? Trauma does the same thing to people. It kind of freezes their process in certain places. There's not, a 29-year-old doesn't get the same slack cut. They still need to learn it, but it's helpful if, if we are the cannabis user, that we be real forthright with the people around us and say, look, I'm making some changes. You don't have to say, hey, I was a cannabis user and I'm not anymore, and I don't know how to deal with this. You can say that, but you don't always have to be that fully forthright. You can say, look, I just realized I'm maybe lacking some skills in a couple of areas, and I'm afraid you guys are going to make fun of me because I don't actually know how to deal with this. So if you can just bear with me while I try to figure out how to process this energy that you all probably think I should know how to deal with by now, or that preemptive vocabulary. And you might need to be reminding people that are around you, but it can give you the wiggle room that you need to learn those processes and ask those questions that you might not feel comfortable asking at 27, 28, and 29 because everybody else seems to get it, but you don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I guess my question was more geared towards, is it like being stunted permanently? And you answered that, so thank you.
Yeah, and nothing's permanent unless you decide to do nothing about it, and then it just stays.
Gotcha. Thank
All
you.
right, awesome. You're welcome. So, okay. So let's move on to some crystals and stones. everything's got a vibration and an energy to it. Some people are aligned with plants, some people are aligned with food, some people are aligned with animals, some people are aligned with crystals and rocks. And they can play a significant role in your energetic field, whether you recognize that or can sense that or not. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to share some of the most important ones with you. So I want to start out by saying that rocks are kind of like people. They might all be able to do anything, right? So if you look in a crystal book or you talk to, you know, crystal person X or Y, they'll say, oh, this is the stone for that. And that's what I'm going to share with you is some of that information. But know that, like, you could go outside and say, I need a rock. Is there a rock that wants to help me with my stress? And whatever rock stands out to you, grab it, because it'll do it. You know, we all have those skills. You know, if somebody walked into a crowd and said, I need help with this, anybody in that crowd might be able to help with it. Some of them might be better at it than others. Some might have a proclivity for that. But technically, anybody can help. So, you know, whoever's stepping up, that's who you can use. But in the realm of specifics, the most important stone, the most important two stones. So one of them is a stone that's directly associated with this new 8 chakra system that we're dealing with. And if you are an empath and you have integrated to the new 8 chakra system, or you were born with the 8 chakra system, this stone is your friend. It is going to be very, very easy to become really dependent upon this stone if you're not careful, particularly once you figure out how awesome it is. So, you know, again, just like we were talking about the use of cannabis and alcohol or other medicine, whether it's pharmaceutical or natural based, you know, we want things that aid us, not, we don't want to become dependent upon them in some form. So the first stone I want to talk about is Gemi rhodonite. And rhodonite is spelled R-H-O-D, I think, O-N-I-T-E. And actually, I've got the Gemi one here, but I want to show you what non-Gemi rhodonite looks like. And this isn't a very good example. Rhodonite, by and large, looks a lot like rhodochrosite. It often has just pink and white opaque stone in it. Now, this, let me see if I can get it at an angle where you can see it without it being, no, you can't, maybe a little bit. This one has been dyed, and it's not Gemi rhodonite, it's regular rhodonite, and it just looks, oh, there, you can see it better if I put it off to the side. So that darkness in that pink right there, rhodonite might have regular rhodonite, but more often than not, it's going to be lighter than that, like a lighter pink with some white lines in it. And I wouldn't normally have a stone that's dyed, but I picked this up because the vibe was good for, but here's the thing. Gemi rhodonite doesn't look like that. And Gemi rhodonite is the only stone I have ever come across ever where the Gemi version actually has different properties than the non-Gemi version. Regular rhodonite has its own stuff. But if you are looking for a stone that really works with this new 8th chakra and this resonance-based system, and you need help out in the world, Gemi rhodonite is your friend. If you go online and start looking for Gemi rhodonite, there are people who are selling it. It is not always Gemi rhodonite. So I would caution you to be very careful about what you're buying. Gemi rhodonite, so this is a piece of it. This is a big chunk of it, actually. And the difference between regular rhodonite and Gemi rhodonite, and I should have gotten a flashlight so I could show this to you, but maybe my phone will show it to you if I use the light on it. So regular rhodonite light cannot pass through it. Gemi rhodonite is still kind of opaque, but light will pass through it. So I'm going to get, like, I'll show you this. See, there is no light coming really through that, barely any, but right there, just a little bit, right? But regular rhodonite, the Gemi rhodonite, looks like a Jolly Rancher, right? Oh, you can't see that very well. Yeah, if you can see. Nope, can't see that either. So it's not overly beautiful, right? It just kind of looks like a dark pink fuchsia kind of colored stone. One of the best sources that I know for this is a guy named Gene Jackson, goes by the Crystal Guy, and he's in Cincinnati, Ohio. So if you go to thecrystalguy.com, Gene carries true gemmy rhodonite. Now, this stuff is, not the most expensive stuff on the world, but it's definitely not cheap. So, it's sold by weight. A piece like this, maybe somewhere between 30 and 50 bucks. And you can get higher grade. So like this is actually a gemmy rhodonite needle, and that would be, pretty expensive. Something this size, if you could find it, is probably going to run you $500 at least. And the necklace that I have that I got so attached to was actually cut off of this particular rock. And then occasionally you'll be able to find like a cut version, which you can't see that very well either, but that is a real clear cut version of it. You don't need that, right? There's no reason. I mean, unless you're just hell-bent on having that, pretty shiny, sparkly kind of thing, get this, because it's going to work. And if you can wear it on your system over that heart chakra, it's a whole different world out there. I got really attached to mine. I got to where I was wearing it to teach all my classes. So if you ever look back at some old pictures, you might see this great big piece hanging on my chest. And it was so helpful. And I've got a lot of stones. Like you can look behind me, it's just a portion of them. I've got a lot of stones, and I worked with a lot of rocks. I hadn't worked with anything that was like that potent for just making the world feel like an okay place to be, that if I pulled out of my driveway, I could tell if I didn't have it. And I got to where I would turn around and come back and get it. And that's when I knew, like, okay, I'm too dependent upon this rock. And I started making sure I left it at home and just toughen it out, because without doing that, like I was so dependent on the stone, I was losing my skills for managing myself in public spaces, which just makes you want to hermit that much further. So much like we were talking about, using drugs or alcohol in kind of making the world easier to bear or tolerate, it can become problematic too, so you just want to be careful around that. But gemmy rhodonite is the most important stone for the next section of human, evolution, at least in our lifetime, really. And then to speak to some generalized empath stones. The first one I would tell you is black tourmaline. And black tourmaline is really common, and it's very inexpensive. You can certainly get pieces that are going to cost a bunch of money, but it doesn't have to be fabulous, right? And it doesn't have to be big. Now, there's two things I'll tell you about black tourmaline. So black tourmaline is one of the only stones that protects the layers of the energetic body. So think of it like kind of like filters on your fields. And it, unlike the filter that we put on our field last week, so the filter that we put on our field in that process was filtering for that which is in our greatest good. Black tourmaline is just going to filter your field. So, I can't recommend to you in good consciousness that you use it all the time. But if you're looking for a breather and you're looking for some space where you can get some work done and you can offload and get yourself back into balance, it's a great tool. So, this one right here is a very pretty, beautiful black tourmaline needle with a little termination on the top. Great. If you want to buy one of those, it's fine. Most of the time, what you're going to find is like these are ones that I actually have left over from the empath class that I used to teach, and they are not that pretty, right? They're not shiny. They might look kind of crunchy, and they'll fall apart in pieces. Doesn't matter. It's going to work. Sometimes you can find, and they'll be inexpensive. Put it on your body, anywhere on your body. Put it on your keychain. Get online and order a bracelet of black tourmaline beads, or get a nice carved necklace if you don't want it to look, too woo-woo or whatever it is that's going on. Black tourmaline on your body or in your field protects your field. I have a piece that's about this big that sits near my front door because I see clients from home, and so there's a lot of traffic here for that purpose, and then there's just a lot of traffic here in people coming and going, and I'm sensitive. So, you know, just like I would sweep and mop my floors, I manage the energy of that space too. And that black tourmaline was taking such a hit that it literally was crumbling at the front door. So like I was always giving away little pieces like, oh, this fell off while you're here, take it home, you obviously need it, kind of thing. I did finally move it about 2.5 feet away from the door front, and it crumbles less. But that's how much they work. And don't be surprised if yours crumbles, breaks, turns to dust, because as they work and give away their energy, they might do that. If it gets to a point where you feel like, okay, it's too tired, you know, take it outside, bury it in the ground, and get another one, you know, and always thank them, you know, just think of them like people. Thanks for doing your work, appreciate that. So it's a good one to have. It's also really good to throw black tourmaline under the mat of your floorboard in your car. Couple of reasons. One, protects you while you're going down the road. And if you probably didn't think about this, but as you drive, you're driving in the slipstream of everybody else's junk. So one of the worst places for me to be is on the freeway, especially at rush hour. It's literally like soup. I mean, and it'll protect your fields, you know, because it's under the floorboards. The other thing is that grounding stones like hematite and black tourmaline under the mat in your car actually make your car more seen. So like if you're the getaway vehicle for a robbery, don't put these in your car. But if you want to make sure that people see you, like especially if you are the person who has trouble, like people are always pulling out in front of you or they're always pulling into your lane, you know, black tourmaline's great. Throw it in, you know, under the mat. Just don't suck it up with the vacuum cleaner when you're cleaning it out, and it'll really help with that. The other black stone that looks very similar to it, and mine is on a little stand here with gummy stuff, and it looks just pretty much like black tourmaline, but it's square shaped. And again, you know, finding this might be a little more challenging. Gene Jackson probably has some. Gary at Mahalo Minerals in Maryland or DC usually has some, and it's called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I always call it Aegirine. It's AEGERINE. AEGIRINE. And Aegirine is considered a shaman stone. So kind of like the difference between the empath shield and the fiery defense wall. If you are a person who is using a lot of plant medicine, if you are, you know, a person who is working in, whether you're trying to or whether it just sort of seems to be your lot, in a world where there's big energy to be dealing with or entity stuff or incredible chaos, Aegirine is really the stone to be wearing. It's exceptionally protective. It's going to do a lot more than black tourmaline would, but it's just not necessary for most people. But for the empaths that need it, you know, there's no other way around it. And it's a good stone to have, you know, in your arsenal. Probably the stone that I have the most of that, you know, every empath should be born with a piece of it in their hand is fluorite. Fluorite. And fluorite comes in, you know, colors. You see a lot of it in green. I have more fluorite than any other stone. And I want to show you a couple different versions of it. I've got a couple of them here, but I should have brought these others over for you too. So fluorite grows in two types of forms. It grows in an octahedron form, and I have some more of it here somewhere, but in the octahedron, in the crystalline form, you will sometimes find it and it will look like little cities. But when they knock off those octahedrons, you know, they might look like this. Sometimes they're small, right? They might be green, they might be clear, they might be purple, they might have some pyrite in them. You know, the film here doesn't actually show you the color of these. They might be really dark, or they might have multiple colors in them. And then fluorite grows in a botryoidal form, which is kind of like, think of like if something dripped and compiled over time, and that doesn't make nearly as much of a crystalline, like hard line structure. This one right here, let me see if you can see that over here. So you can see it's got straight lines in it. This was a big chunk growing in crystalline form, and then it's just been like chunked out and polished down. And you can see that it's, you know, dark purple here and green, and it's got some white places in it, so it's multicolored. And see this big white mark right here? So that is not what this looked like when it came. And I'll explain to you what happened to that. Fluorite has really strong cleavage marks, which means like it's got these weak points. Think of it like fault lines in it. And fluorite brings order to chaos. It does a lot of things, but the big thing that it does is it brings order to chaos. So I have it in the house a lot because there's so much energy coming and going here that there is a need for that energy to be organized, right? So that it's tolerable. And fluorite does that. So it's a great piece to put in a room where a lot of people gather. It doesn't have to be a big piece, doesn't have to be this big, right? Like you could get one of these and slide them under the couch, right? It doesn't matter. Fluorite comes in bead form, like you can do all kinds of things with it. This one here is a slab, and you can probably see a little bit like it's got a blue line in it, but see how it's not so sharply defined? This is the bitrodal form, and then, you know, the purple and then a little bit of pink. So there's a lot of colors, and it doesn't really matter a whole lot which one you get. But having it on you, having it in your space, it's a big, big space saver, particularly for those of you, like all empaths are going to pick up a little bit of environmental energy, but your home is really meant to be your refuge, your respite. And if you're dragging home crazy, chaotic energy from work, from the store, if there's lots of people coming and going, any of those things, getting some fluorite and putting it in your room or in every room, extremely helpful to you. And again, not very expensive. Now, if you go and you buy the octahedrons, they can. It kind of depends on who you're getting them from. But fluorite in and of itself is not overly expensive, and it's found in all kinds of places in the world. So unless you're looking for a very specific variety, it doesn't really matter if it comes from, Indiana or China. Fluorite's very helpful. Kyanite, and some of you might be familiar with kyanite. Kyanite comes in a blue form, which is the most common form of that. And then an orange form. I don't know why I didn't grab that one because I want to show it to you. Kyanite is one of the few stones that never needs balancing or clearing. So, your other stones can pick up energetic dirt and debris and might need some help. Kyanite's never going to need that. And kyanite, like fluorite, might crumble. So we were talking a little bit about the cleaving in fluorite, and I kind of guess I lost track there for a minute. If your fluorite crumbles in your pocket or breaks or shatters, don't worry about that. That's what happened to this one. So the person that was sitting near this was going through some pretty heavy stuff in their life, and I heard this poof from the other room, and I thought, what was that? It sounded like something broke. And I walked in and we looked all over and we couldn't find it, and then finally realized that this stone had blown out. So it's still smooth, but it's all white where it expanded dealing with that energy, and all this is air now that's in that stone. When it didn't look like that before, it just looked like this. So, fluorite's real prone to breaking and cleaving as it moves that chaotic energy. The more chaos there is, so your octahedrons might break in half, or your little palm stone might, break in half. Don't worry about it. Gives you half to give away, or now you've got one in your car and one in your coat pocket. So whatever works there. So back to kyanite. So this is the blue version of it, and it's usually light blue, and sometimes we'll have like a nice dark blue, stripe through it. Some of it's, darker than others. You don't need a piece this big. You don't need a piece this big. I just picked big ones so you could see them on the film. You need something this big, right? Like not even. And it might crumble in your pocket, right? But that's fine. Just get another one. It's not very expensive. It's going to automatically align all of your chakras with each other and clear them. So it kind of just pulls you together, particularly if you use it with intention. So like if you pull it out of your pocket or you get it off of your shelf and you hold it and you set an intention and like just breathe with like, okay, I'm trying to balance and center myself. It does it automatically. It'll just do it more efficiently. If you happen to be an empath who really struggles with feeling supported in the world, which is pretty common for an empath, is that, your sense of support is skewed. There is an orange kyanite, and it looks just like this. And Gene Jackson at the Crystal Guy used to have some of this too. I don't see this very often, but he usually carries some of this. And it does the exact same thing. Doesn't need cleared, doesn't need balanced. automatically aligns your chakras and balances them with one another, but is going to kind of be more potent at that second chakra. So, you're trying to be self-supportive. You're trying to break support dependency. You're just not feeling supported, regardless of what you may know. Like, this is going to be a good one. I used to tape these to me right around my navel and, go places as I was, playing with stones and checking out what they do. Very, very, very helpful. The blue one's kind of a catch-all for everything, but if you're really, struggling with support-based stuff, the orange one is a good one. And kyanite also comes in green and black. Any of them will work for you, but the blue is kind of the catch-all, and the orange has a specificity that seems to apply to empaths more. And then the last stone that I really want to talk to you about is called chrysoprase. CHRYSOPRASE, chrysoprase. And chrysoprase is like if you imagined flying over the Caribbean or the Bermuda Triangle, and it's got that kind of blue-green, but mostly towards the green look, and the sand is like, and it's like the water is glowing at you. That's what chrysoprase kind of looks like. And Sherry, I see your question there in the side. I'm going to get to that here in just a second, or your comment. So this is chrysoprase. I'm going to put a light behind it. Chrysoprase almost always will transmit light through it. Oh, you still can't see that very well. Nope, not going to let me do that. Nope. Okay. So light green in color, but it kind of almost acts like it's emitting its own light a little bit, just a little bit fluorescing. And chrysoprase aligns the chakras, with the ethereal body, and is particularly good if you are trying to accept yourself, accept yourself and others. It's no good to you if you're trying to accept others and you don't accept yourself. So it's really important, if you're trying to accept yourself and others, this is a fabulous stone. And there's so much diverse division, going on in the world right now. And we're all in these transitionary places. So, even if we weren't transitioning, the level of division that we're all dealing with has us like this side versus this side. And it's really hard to bridge those gaps if you're not accepting of the self or accepting of others. When you add transition into that, and you want to be honoring of the self, but also honoring of other people's transition, and them working with what's resonant for them. If you struggle with that, if you struggle with judgment of the self or others, this is a really good stone. The pendant I was talking to you about, made from the gemi rhodonite earlier, was actually made by Gene Jackson. And it was gemi rhodonite on one side and chrysoprase on the other, and he fused them for me. And that was the necklace that, was like, walking around in your own fabulous bubble. This one isn't going to create as much dependency for you that gemi rhodonite might, but a nice small piece of gemi rhodonite might only run you like $20. You can get a small one; doesn't have to be anything big, and good chrysoprase. And again, like the chrysoprase that I have for class, I'm just pulling out some of these bigger pieces so that you can see them, but it really doesn't require these big pieces. So the ones that I pass around in class are literally like about, this big. They're tiny little tumbled stones. And you can just throw them in your pocket or throw them in a bag or, get it put on a bracelet, put them on your keychain. It doesn't really matter. But very, very helpful to helping, you deal with the energies when you need it. And of course, there are endless stones out there that you can use if you feel resonant with something. Again, you might be like, oh, I need to go get some fluorite. But if you stop in front of the stones and go, okay, I'm here to get fluorite, but whether it's at your own, cabinet or you went to the stone store, but I'm really trying to solve this issue. What do I need the most? Something will probably speak to you. You all are sensitive enough to be able to pick that up. Feel into that, right? Rather than your brain, feel what's speaking to you. And so sometimes you'll see like, oh, this stone over here is speaking to me. If you can get past the shiny, bright, glittery squirrel, right? Like, this is pretty. And just really speak to, what's calling to me. And then, you know, a lot of times they'll have, those stone places will have these books, you can look them up, and then you'll look up the stone and read about it, and you'll be like, oh, now I know what it was calling to me. So, you know, like I said, a lot of them have crossover, things that you can use in multitudes of ways. If I were picking 2 stones, and only 2 stones, for any empath on any given day, it would be gemmy rhodonite and black tourmaline. Those would be the 2 biggies. Because if you can feel strong and centered here, and you get a little bit of buffer space with that black tourmaline, you can get your own chakras aligned, you can be self-supportive, you've got room to work in. But if you are getting bombarded from the outside, it's pretty hard to be dealing with that and, you know, and align your chakras or keep your balance or be self-supportive, any of those sorts of things. So those are the recommendations that I have around that. And then, you know, if you guys have any questions around stones, or if you have stones that, you know, you have that you've been using, you have a question about, be happy to take those. I'm going to scroll through the chat room for a second and just try to touch base on some of the things that might be important in there. As an empath, are there stones to avoid? No. I mean, radioactive stones. There are stones that have, you know, chemicals in them, naturally occurring chemicals that, you know, you don't want to take into your system, like stibnite. You don't want to be handling. You can handle it, but you want to wash your hands afterwards. Cinnabar, those sorts of things. But there isn't really any stone that empaths in general would want to avoid. Try to remember that you are sensitive. So, you know, when I teach the teen classes and we're doing stones for chakras and stuff, I don't give them phenakite for the crown chakra. Phenakite doesn't typically play nice, right? It is a killer high vibration stone, but you know, like you're going come hell or high water. There's nothing nice about it. I would never give that to somebody as a crown chakra stone, particularly a sensitive person. You know, so if you're sensitive, look for the stones that, you know, feel good to you. You might be more inclined to something like a apophyllite for a crown chakra stone. So there are stones that are intense, and they might just be too intense, you know, for you, depending upon your sensitivity. And different empaths are going to have different levels of sensitivity to different things. So you might be really sensitive to plants, not that sensitive to rocks, and, you know, that kind of thing. So that would be how I deal with that. So Devin says, I heard shaman stone being used for the labradorite as well. Can you talk about that stone? That's similar, different than agerine. They're entirely different. Labradorite's great for shadow work stuff. It's a shaman stone for seeing the unseen, light and energy in kind of unseen ways is probably my best definition for that. It's not really a protective stone. So, you know, think of agerine as shaman's protective stone and labradorite more like the shaman's crystal ball kind of thing. Make sense? Okay. I can see it. I can see you nodding your head. So good. I can't hear you, but Sherry says, one of my green fluorites lost all those cutter when I was going through a lot of emotional stuff. So that's super common. And there are stones that are way more prone to that. So if your fluorite goes from green to white or purple to white, or it gets really washed out, the same can happen for amethyst, and it can happen to citrine. Now there are stones that if you put them in the sunlight, they're going to lose their color, and fluorite's one of them, right? So if you leave it in sunlight, it's going to bleach out. But if you're wearing it, using it, carrying it in your pocket, and it loses its color, that's kind of, doesn't happen always, you know, if you're using a stone, but some people will kind of just suck the color right out of a stone. And that's that stone's giveaway. So don't think of that like, oh, I ruined this stone, I killed it. That stone is giving its energy away. When it gets to that place, check in with it. You know, you're still resonant for me? Are you still resonant to work with me? If not, give it back to the earth. And, you know, get another one if you feel like you need it, or move on to the next thing. But, yeah, that's pretty common for them to lose some colors. Let's see, what else is in here? Kate says, thank you. You're very welcome. New Bach Flower Remedies has the questionnaire. Yes, the New Bach Flower Remedies book. Or it's called New Bach Flower Therapies, not Remedies. New Bach Flower Therapies. The guy's name is Dietmar Kramer, D-I-E-T-M-A-R, Kramer, Kramer. Actually, let me just scroll up here so I'm not reading these backwards. Yes, so Heather was asking if you're not local, can Crystal still do a consultation? Absolutely, it's all done by the phone. You know, it was by the phone before we were all in quarantine, so that's all it really takes. Is a phone conversation, and he ships oils, no problem. And most of these, I don't, somebody might have asked this in the chat here, but most of these oils run around $25. They have a lot of stones in them. So I know maybe you can't see that in the video, but there is a lot of stones in there, and he does a lot of intention work with these. So, you know, he's not making a boatload on these. This is not a, you know, get rich thing, and it's extremely rare for me to endorse a product in any way. I wouldn't do that unless these things were just killer. So they're worth it. And if you're on a budget, you know, I would start with the Empath one. So how long would you use the oils and flower remedies? Oils you can use however long you feel needed. You know, you can use them every day. If you were dealing with any of the master key oils, which we didn't talk about, but if you're doing master key oils, you'd want to use those in a succession over a period of time. But these, you know, if you're working with something, yeah, use it every day, but you can use them situationally. The flower remedies, again, you can use them situationally like we were talking about with the Centauri right before you walk into the party or something like that. But if you're working on problems that are programmed into the system, you know, that you're trying to alleviate or long-standing issues, 30 days is usually the standard with that. You can do it longer, but 30 days is really where I would go with that. How do you know when you've completed what you need? Check in with the self. I would tell you to check and see if it's resonant with you. Again, I'm going to refer you to that Facebook Live that we're doing tomorrow around resonance, because that's a really good question, and there's no standard answer across the board for that. So it's going to be individualized and dependent, you know, on where you are. And maybe you're done with it for now, and you needed, you know, you need a break, and maybe you need to start it back up in a week. Well, how will you know that if you don't know how to check in with what's resonant? So, you know, it's going to change around that. Sherry says, thank you. You're very, very welcome. Joanna, did she say thyme or pine? Pine, like pine tree, Joanna. Pine for guilt. Oh, Alexis answered that. Thank you, Alexis. What is the book called and the best oil? Are we talking about the New Bach Flowers Therapy book? New Bach Flower Therapies, but remember, we're not using Bach, at least I'm not using Bach. And the other one is called the New Bach Flower Body Maps. And this is the one that has the quadrants in it. And all of the quadrants, just a heads up if you're body part squeamish in any way or uncomfortable with that, all the body parts are mapped. And you can skip parts if it makes you feel uncomfortable. You don't want to put it on that part of your body, you can skip it. It's not the end of the world. And the best oil. Best two oils, in my opinion, for an empath are going to be the Empath Shield and the Earth Elemental oil. If I could only pack two, you know, in a getaway bag, it'd be those two. What was before oak? Oh, unfortunately, Joanna, I have no idea where I was in that process of the conversation. So I don't know what was before oak when we talked about that. Mustard. Oh, somebody else answered that. Thank you. Let's see what else. So, labradorite. So if you have it, is it helping you work on your shadow stuff to resolve it, or not a helpful stone for an empath? Confused with your comment. So any stone can have an impact on you whether you're working with it intentionally or not. And, you know, I would encourage you to look up several different people's versions of what a stone might mean. I'm a little bit partial to Melody's, you know, kind of the Crystal Bible, the encyclopedia there. There are some other people that put some good stuff out around that information. The Crystal Guy will be able to tell you a lot of that stuff too, but I would look in many of them. What labradorite's typical traits are for someone, I'm not totally sure. From a shamanistic standpoint, labradorite would be used with intention, at least I would use it with intention, around helping me find the light in dark places. So like if I'm struggling with something, and I feel angry about it, or if I could only see it with its negatives, then I might use labradorite as a means of helping me see the light in it, because it's very refractive. Labradorite is one of those stones that has chatoyance in it, so it's the way that the rock grows, so it will look like it's got depth, but it refracts light. It's called chatoyance, and so it's good for that. It's also good for bringing light into dark places in you. If you're doing your own shadow work, you can use that stone to help you not look at your shadow stuff like it's bad, right? That there is a balance between light and dark, and that all of those things exist. So, it's a good stone to use in that regard as well. But shamanistic use of that would be in helping see the unseen, would be how I would use that. My physical body is getting hit pretty hard, mainly in the gut. Which of these things you mentioned would be most helpful? It's an emotional problem that's having a physical body response. So if I were really genuinely getting hit right here in my gut, I would, and you felt like it was coming from the collective conscious. Let's start with Empath Shield. Where is it? I would pull Empath Shield, and I would pull Ultimate Personal Power, because that stone, or that oil right there on the solar plexus, is killer. It's got amblygonite in it. It's got a bunch of rocks in it, but it's got amblygonite. And amblygonite is like the solar plexus stone. Everybody's all about citrine, and I'm pretty sure this probably has heliodor oil in it too. This stuff is amazing for self-worth, self-value. It's called Ultimate Personal Power, and that kind of makes it sound like, arrogant and power up, but it's really about self-worth, self-value, and does a great job. That's what I would use there. And as far as the stone goes, if you were using a stone, I would probably use fluorite, because it would help organize the chaotic energies that can really, give us a hit in the gut, of the ones that we mentioned anyway. So hopefully that answers that. Trista, hi Trista. I can't see everybody that's in here, so it's good to see you in there. Did you say you have a Facebook Live on resonance tomorrow? Yes, and you're very welcome. One of the big challenges, and I see it in people talking all the time, it comes up in sessions, I see it on social media, we see it in our social lives, is that people will say like, oh yeah, that's not resonant with me. And it's a misuse of the word. And what they mean to say, what they really mean most of the time is, I don't want to do that, right? But when you misuse a word as important as resonance, you devalue the concept of resonance in the culture. And it's a bit of an issue. And then you don't understand what's happening. So what I want to do this, or I don't want to do this, is very different than what's resonant. What's resonant is really about what's in vibratory resonance with my soul's greatest good at this point, right? It's nothing to do with what you damn want. So they might be aligned, but they don't have anything to do with one another. And if you don't know how to tell the difference between what you want and what's resonant, you'll interchange those words, and you'll use resonant all the time to be like, that's resonant with me. Which means that feels good, or I want to do that. But that's not what that word means, not when we're using it from an energetic standpoint. And so when we talk about moving into an 8-chakra system, where it's a resonance-based world, if you're taking that to mean it's a world that's going to be all about what I want, you will be sorely disappointed. So it's really helpful for you to understand that there's a difference between what I think, what I believe, what I feel, or what I want, and what's resonant. Like, those things are different. And there's a tool that's super simple that can be used a couple of different ways, and it can be used in that resonance thing. And I'm going to teach that in that class tomorrow. But that's a Facebook Live. That's not going to be on Zoom. There won't be any codes for that, so you'll have to hop onto Facebook. It's at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and anybody that can get in it, and it won't die. Well, hopefully it won't die like the Facebook Lives that we do from Zoom. So it should stay true to that. Christine says, thank you, you're very welcome. Do the oils have any scent? So Kathy's asking about the oils having a scent. Some of these do. But the thing of it is all you have to do is tell Chris you don't want any scent in it. And I haven't noticed, like, the new ones that he dropped off for me to check out. I haven't been noticing any scent in those newer ones. This one has a little bit in it. I don't think he's selling that one yet, though. You can get them without that. You know, it's not overly necessary. Some of the oils had some herbs in them at different points, and those sometimes have a little bit of a smell to them. But all you have to do is tell him you don't want a scent in it, and he'll either tell you, like, it's important and here's why, or no problem. You know, but anyway, he can make, and he doesn't make giant batches of these, so he might make 3 to 5 bottles at a time. You know, you might be the person that calls and says, I need this oil, and he'll say, cool, I'll make some. And he'll make you a batch without any oil in it, no problem, or without any scent in it. So again, highpoweroils@gmail.com, or check out his Facebook page. There's a page for it, and I think there's a group page too, and he puts some videos out and stuff like that. So since nobody has any other questions and we've gone through the list, I want to tell you all thank you very much for attending the second one of these classes. I'm not sure if we're going to do a third one, but keep your eye out for that if you are not on the mailing list and you would like to be notified if we're going to do any continuing empath classes. Make sure that you're on that. You can go to julienorth.com. Next week is the first class, might be the only class, but we'll see, on intuitive development. And this tool that we're teaching tomorrow in the residence class has a dual purpose. And it's a thing that they taught me when I was a young kid that's still applicable. It's not like it's a kid's tool, so you don't get to use it as an adult or it doesn't work. It's a powerful tool, and it'll help you get out of your way. So that intuitive development class next week talks really a lot about how to use that. It's on Wednesday, and I think it's 7 o'clock on Wednesday, Eastern Standard Time. So same is true for this, you know, sign in as usual, and it'll probably take us a couple of hours with a little break in the middle. So hopefully we'll see you there and on the Facebook Live tomorrow. And as we put up some new classes and some new options, I'll make sure to keep you all informed. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you guys later.